The sign above the chain-link gate had once been bright blue. The kind of blue people noticed from the county road when they were looking for a place to bring a lost dog or adopt an old one nobody wanted anymore. Now the paint had peeled away in long strips, and the words Echo Ridge K9 Rescue hung crooked in the winter dark, half swallowed by sleet. Under it, a county notice had been stapled to the fence, closed by order. Property pending transfer. No trespassing. The paper was soaked. The corners curled. But the red stamp across the bottom still looked fresh, like the town had only recently decided this place was no longer worth saving. Behind the shelter, where the floodlights had burned out months ago, an old man sat with his back against kennel number 7. His name was Samuel Briggs, though most people in town called him Crazy Briggs now. If they bothered to call him anything at all, he was 68 years old, with a white beard, a bad hip, and hands that trembled harder when the cold settled into his bones. But he was not sleeping. He was working. If stories about forgotten veterans, loyal canines, and buried truths matter to you, make sure you subscribe, because what happened behind this closed shelter was only the beginning. Sam held a cracked leather collar in his lap, guiding a needle through the worn strap with careful, stubborn patience. The collar had belonged to a dog named Atlas. The brass plate was tarnished green around the edges, but the name was still there. Sam rubbed his thumb across those 5 letters as if they were the last living thing that still knew who he had been. Almost done. Boy, he whispered, I told you I'd keep it together. There were no dogs left in the kennels. The bowls had been stacked by the office door. The runs were empty. Old chew marks scarred the wood near the gates, and wind moved through the narrow spaces where barking used to be. But Sam still kept his voice low, the way handlers do around dogs that have seen too much. Beside him sat a plastic grocery bag with everything he owned: a wool cap, 2 pairs of socks, an empty prescription bottle, a can of beans, and a black notebook wrapped in 3 layers of freezer bag plastic. The notebook never left his side. Its cover was burned along one edge, and the pages had turned stiff from smoke and age. On the first page, in faded handwriting, were the words Echo Ridge Transfer Log. Sam had shown that notebook to people before. A woman at the county office had slid it back to him without reading past the first page. A deputy had told him old military stories did not prove land ownership. A social worker had said trauma could make memories feel more real than records. A young lawyer in polished shoes had smiled and told him, Mr. Briggs, if there is no official file, there is no claim. After a while, Sam stopped trying to explain. At 9:17 that night, headlights swept across the rear fence. A white security truck rolled behind the shelter and stopped near the dumpsters. The driver's door opened, and a heavy-set man in a black raincoat stepped out with a flashlight in one hand and a clipboard in the other. His name was Miller. Sam knew him well enough. He was the kind of man Clayton Voss sent when he wanted someone scared but did not want to be seen doing the scaring himself. Miller shined the beam straight into Sam's face. Still here. Briggs. Sam lowered the needle. Gate was locked. That's the point. Miller walked closer. Boots, splashing through slush. Machines come in tomorrow morning. Anything left behind goes in the dump. Sam looked past him toward the empty kennels. This place was built for dogs that served. Miller laughed under his breath. There are no dogs. There is no rescue. And according to the county, there was no service record for you either. Sam's jaw tightened. He did not rise. Not yet. Miller nudged the grocery bag with his boot. It tipped over. The prescription bottle rolled across the concrete. The can of beans hit the kennel door with a hollow clang. Then the wrapped notebook slid out. Sam moved faster than Miller expected. "Don't touch that." Miller bent down anyway and picked it up between two fingers. "This your proof again." Sam stood slowly, his bad hip fighting him all the way. In the flashlight beam, his face no longer looked confused or weak. It looked disciplined, worn down. Yes, forgotten. Maybe, but not broken. "That log has names in it," Sam said. "Handlers, dogs, men your boss erased." Miller's smile thinned. Then he noticed the patch on Sam's left sleeve. It was barely hanging on, stitched to an old field jacket faded by years of rain and sun. A dog's head, an eagle, globe, and anchor. Two words curved along the bottom: Echo Ridge. Miller reached for it. Sam caught his wrist. For 1 second, neither man moved. Then Miller shoved him back against the kennel door. Sam hit the metal hard enough to rattle the latch. Atlas's collar slipped from his hand and landed in the slush. "You listen to me," Miller said. "By this time tomorrow, there won't be a kennel, a file, or one of your crazy stories left standing." Sam bent down and picked up the collar. His fingers closed around it with quiet defiance. "I made a promise here." To whom Miller sneered. A dead dog, Sam did not answer. Because the truth was worse than that. He had made a promise to a dying Marine, to a dog that dragged itself back to Kennel 7 with blood on its muzzle, to men whose names had vanished from records as if service could be erased with a stamp. Miller turned toward his truck. Then another engine sounded from the access road. Low, old, steady. A dark pickup stopped outside the rear gate. The driver's door opened, and a man in a worn Marine jacket stepped down into the cold. Sam barely looked at him, but the dog that jumped down after him made the old handler forget how to breathe. A scarred Belgian Malinois stood beside the truck, gray around the muzzle, still as a shadow. It did not bark. It did not pull. It simply stared through the fence. Past Miller. Past the flashlight. Past the ruined shelter. Its eyes locked on the frayed Echo Ridge patch on Sam's sleeve. And for the first time in years, Samuel Briggs felt the past recognize him before any person did. The man in the worn Marine jacket stood outside the fence for a moment before he said a word. He did not rush toward the old man. He did not bark questions at Miller. He simply took in the scene the way certain men do when they have spent too many years learning that danger usually tells the truth before people do. His name was Ethan Cole. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered but lean, with a face that looked like it had forgotten how to rest. The jacket he wore had faded at the elbows, and the boots on his feet carried old mud along the seams. A dog tag hung beneath his collar, hidden until the wind shifted his coat open. On one side of it was his own name. On the other was the tag that had belonged to his father, Captain Daniel Cole. Ethan had not come to Echo Ridge looking for trouble. He had come because the county sent him a letter saying a box of his father's belongings, long misplaced after the shelter closed, might still be stored in the office. He had planned to pick it up, sign whatever paper needed signing, and leave town before morning. That was how he handled the past now. He kept it boxed, labeled, and far enough away that it could not ask questions. Beside him stood Ranger, his retired Belgian Malinois. Ranger was older now, gray around the muzzle, with a scar beneath one eye and a notch cut clean through the edge of one ear. But age had not softened the way he watched the world. He stood close to Ethan's left leg, head level, body quiet, eyes moving from Miller to Sam to the ruined kennels behind them. He did not behave like a pet waiting to be noticed. He behaved like a partner waiting to understand the mission. Miller raised his flashlight toward Ethan. "This is private property," he said. Ethan looked at the county notice stapled to the gate. "Looks like it used to be an animal shelter." "Used to be," Miller said. "Now it's closed. You need to turn around." Ethan's eyes moved past him to Sam Briggs, who was still holding the cracked leather collar in both hands. The old man's jacket was soaked at the shoulders. His grocery bag lay spilled on the concrete. The black notebook had been shoved near the kennel wall, still wrapped in plastic. Still close enough for Sam to keep one foot beside it like a guard. "You all right, sir?" Ethan asked. Sam hated the question because it was asked gently. Mockery was easy. Pity could be ignored. But a steady voice from a man who knew how to stand in the cold made the truth harder to hide. "I'm not hurt," Sam said. "That wasn't what I asked." Miller stepped between them. "He's fine. He's been told to leave. We deal with him all the time." Ethan looked at Miller then. Nothing about his expression changed. But Miller's shoulders tightened anyway. "Do you?" Ethan asked. Miller gave a dry laugh. "Look, I don't know who you are, but this isn't your concern." Ethan reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out the folded county letter. He held it up through the fence. "Ethan Cole, I was told there might be stored property here belonging to my father." Sam's eyes lifted. Cole. The name moved through him like a match struck in a dark room. Miller glanced at the paper and frowned. "Office is closed. There are no office hours on the notice." "Then call the county." "I did." "Then maybe take the hint." For a few seconds, Ethan said nothing. His gaze dropped to the old collar in Sam's hands, then to the patch hanging by threads from Sam's sleeve. A dog's head, an eagle, globe, and anchor. The words Echo Ridge curved at the bottom. Ranger saw it too. The Malinois stepped forward, slow and deliberate, until his nose nearly touched the chain-link fence. His ears lifted. His breathing changed. He was sorting scent from rust. Rain, old wool, leather, and something buried deep in the fibers of Sam's jacket. Ethan noticed immediately. "Ranger," he said. The dog did not look back. Ethan's voice lowered. "Ranger." "Heel." Ranger remained fixed on the patch. That was when Ethan felt the first true unease of the night. Ranger had ignored noise, pain, crowds, sirens, and gunfire. He did not disobey because something smelled interesting. He only broke pattern when something mattered. Sam stared at the dog with a kind of frightened recognition. The posture, the stillness, the way Ranger waited for a command that had not been spoken yet. It was not Atlas. Sam knew that. Atlas had been gone for years, but training had a way of surviving inside the body. In dogs, in men, in grief, without meaning to. Sam whispered, "Easy." Echo. Ranger dropped low at once. His chest lowered toward the wet ground. Front paws squared. Head forward. Waiting. Miller stopped smiling. Ethan felt the blood leave his hands. He knew that command years earlier. After he returned from his last deployment, Ethan had found an old field manual in his father's footlocker. No official seal. No clean title page. Just handwritten notes in Daniel Cole's careful script and a set of short K9 commands marked under the name Echo. Ethan had used some of them while training Ranger, thinking they were just old habits his father had picked up somewhere. Now, a homeless man behind a closed animal shelter had spoken one of those commands perfectly. Ethan turned to Sam. Where did you learn that Sam pulled his sleeve down over the patch? You should take your dog and go. Mr. Cole. The use of his name made Ethan go still. You knew my father, he said. Sam looked at him then. Really looked. The jaw was harder. The eyes, older. But there was Daniel in him. The same discipline. The same wound carried quietly. I knew the dogs he trusted. Sam said. Ethan stepped closer to the fence. My father died in an accident. Sam's hand closed around Atlas's collar until the cracked leather bent in his palm. No, he said softly. Your father died trying to keep men like me from being erased. Behind them, Ranger rose from the ground and turned toward the dark row of kennels. His nose lowered. His body aligned toward kennel number 7. Sam's face changed. Ethan saw it. Fear. Memory. And warning all at once. Ranger. Ethan said. But the dog had already started walking. And before we follow him into what waited inside kennel 7, tell me in the comments if you think Sam is telling the truth. Share this story with someone who respects loyal dogs and forgotten veterans. And subscribe so you don't miss what Ranger is about to uncover. Ranger moved toward the dark row of kennels with the quiet certainty of a dog that had already made up his mind. He did not run. He did not look back for permission. His nose stayed low. Sweeping the wet concrete as sleet clicked against the tin roof above him. Every few steps, he paused, tested the air, then continued toward the far end of the yard. Ethan followed through the gate, one hand near his belt, eyes moving from the dog to the shadows between the kennels. He had seen Ranger track through rubble, mud, diesel fumes, and burned-out buildings. But this was different. There was no active threat, no missing person, no fresh trail. This place had been dead for months. Yet Ranger walked as if someone had left a command in the ground. Behind Ethan, Samuel Briggs limped after them, clutching Atlas's old collar against his chest. His breath came short, but it was not from the cold. His eyes were fixed on one kennel at the end of the row. Number 7. The paint on the small metal plate had nearly vanished, but the shape of the number remained. The gate hung crooked. The concrete floor inside was cracked from the drain to the back wall. A sheet of old plywood had been nailed across part of the rear panel, darker than the rest, as if it had been replaced long after the shelter was built. Sam stopped 10 feet away. Don't let him go in there, he said. Ethan turned. Why? Sam's fingers tightened around the collar. Because that's where Atlas died. The words seemed to take the heat out of the air. Miller, still standing near his security truck, called from behind them. That run's condemned. Floor's unstable. Nobody should be messing around in there. Ethan looked over his shoulder. Miller had answered too quickly. Men who knew nothing usually asked questions first. What's under the floor? Ethan asked. Miller's mouth tightened. I said it's unstable. Ranger stepped into kennel 7. Sam flinched as if the dog had crossed into a grave. The Malinois moved straight to the back corner near the drain. He lowered his head, inhaled once, then placed his right paw on a single point beside the long crack in the concrete. His body went still. Ethan crouched beside him. That mark was clean. Exact. Ranger had used it before in training. But Ethan had always believed the behavior came from the old field manual he had found in his father's footlocker years earlier. The manual had no official title. Only Daniel Cole's handwritten notes and a set of canine commands marked under the word Echo. Ethan had trained Ranger with those notes after leaving the service, thinking he was preserving a private habit of his father's. Now, watching Ranger mark the floor in front of Samuel Briggs, Ethan understood The truth was much larger than a habit. Sam's voice was low behind him. Whoever trained that dog came from our line. Ethan brushed slush and dirt from the crack. I trained him. Sam looked at him. Ethan did not look up. With my father's notes, for a moment. Sam said nothing. Then he whispered. Daniel kept the manual. Ranger tapped the concrete once with his paw. Ethan pulled a folding knife from his pocket and worked the blade into the edge of the crack. The concrete had been patched before. And badly. The material broke loose in a chunk, exposing damp soil and the corner of something metal below. Sam took one step back. Miller moved closer. That belongs to the property owner. Ethan kept digging. You told us there was nothing here. I said, get out of the kennel. Another piece of concrete came free. Ethan reached down and pulled up a small metal case wrapped in rotted canvas. It was about the size of a paperback book, rusted around the corners, but still sealed tight. The second, Ethan lifted it. Sam closed his eyes. Atlas brought that back. Sam said. Ethan looked at him, from where Sam opened his eyes again. And they were wet now, though no tears fell. From the night your father didn't come home. Miller stepped forward fast. His hand shot toward the case. Ranger hit the space between Miller and Ethan like a door slamming shut. The dog did not bite. He did not need to. His shoulders squared. His head lowered, and a low warning rolled out of his chest. Miller froze with his fingers inches from the metal box. Ethan rose slowly, the case in one hand, his phone in the other. The screen was already recording. Touch it, Ethan said. And this becomes more than a trespass complaint. Miller looked from the phone to Ranger, then to Sam. His face hardened with a different kind of fear, not fear of the dog, but fear of what might be inside the case. He backed away, breathing through his nose. Ethan set the box on the kennel floor and opened the clasp. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were a faded photograph, a torn strip of leather, a folded transfer form, and a note browned at the edges. Ethan picked up the photograph first. 6 Marines stood in front of the old Echo Ridge sign. 3K9S sat at their feet. Sam was younger in the picture, straight-backed, one hand resting on a powerful shepherd's neck. Beside him stood a man Ethan knew from every photo his mother had kept on the mantel. Captain Daniel Cole, but this Daniel was not stiff or distant. He was smiling like a man who still believed the people around him would make it home. Ethan unfolded the transfer form. At the bottom was his father's signature. Samuel Briggs was listed as handler trainer. Another name appeared beside logistics approval. Gerald Voss. Sam pointed to it. Clayton's father. Ethan picked up the note last. The handwriting was his father's. If I don't make it back. Sam keeps the records. Trust the dogs before the files. For several seconds, Ethan could only hear Ranger breathing beside him. Then Miller lifted his phone. Mr. Voss, he said, voice tight. The old man still has something. And Cole's son is here. He backed toward his truck, never taking his eyes off Ranger. Sam stared at the metal case as if it had dragged 18 years of pain back into the light. Ethan folded his father's note with careful hands and slipped it inside his jacket. For the first time that night, he was no longer just helping a homeless man behind a closed shelter. He was standing at the edge of the truth his father had died trying to protect. Ethan carried the metal case into the shelter office like a man carrying something fragile enough to break the rest of his life. The room was dark except for the flashlight he set upright on the reception counter, its beam spreading across the ceiling in a pale circle. Dust covered the desk. Old adoption forms curled in a plastic tray. A row of empty leash hooks lined the back wall, each one labeled with a name that had been written in black marker years ago and faded to gray. Sam stepped inside slowly, one hand braced against the doorframe, the other still holding Atlas's collar. He did not sit. Men who had lived too long without a safe place rarely sat with their backs to a door. Ranger seemed to understand that. The old Malinois walked past Ethan and lowered himself near the entrance, facing outward, guarding the room without being told. For a moment, nobody spoke. Outside, Miller's truck was gone, but the sound of his threat still seemed to hang in the yard. Voss knew now. Whatever had been buried behind Kennel 7 was no longer safe in the dark. Ethan laid the contents of the case across the counter one piece at a time. The old photograph of Echo Ridge, the transfer form, the torn piece of Atlas's collar, and the note written in Daniel Cole's hand, "Trust the dogs before the files." Ethan stared at those words longer than he meant to. His father had always been a quiet man in Ethan's memory, the kind who left early, came home late, and carried silence like part of the uniform. Ethan had spent years thinking Daniel Cole had taken the truth with him when he died. Now that truth was sitting under a broken flashlight in a condemned animal shelter, guarded by a homeless handler and a retired dog. "My father knew you," Ethan said. Sam gave a tired nod. He knew the dogs first. That was Daniel's way. If a dog trusted a man, Daniel paid attention. Ethan looked at the photograph. Sam was younger in it, standing beside a shepherd with a broad chest and sharp eyes. Daniel stood next to him, one hand resting on the shoulder of another Marine. Behind them, the old Echo Ridge sign looked new. What was Echo Ridge really? Ethan asked. Sam rubbed his thumb over Atlas's brass nameplate. A place they could use when they needed us, and deny when they didn't. He stepped closer to the counter and opened the burned notebook from his plastic bag. The pages were stiff, smoke-stained, and warped at the edges. But the writing inside was still clear. Names, dates, dog identification numbers, handler assignments, medical transfers, field evaluations. Beside several entries was Daniel Cole's signature. Echo Ridge trained K9S for work most people never heard about. Sam said, tracking, recovery, handler transition, rehabilitation for dogs that came back too injured, too sharp, or too bonded to a dead man to be adopted out like pets. We were small, quiet, easy to erase. Ethan turned a page and found Sam's name typed neatly beneath a heading, Handler Trainer. Your record existed, he said. It existed here. Sam tapped the notebook. Not where it mattered. Sam explained it slowly. Not because he was confused, but because he had learned that truth rejected too quickly could sound like madness. There had been a fund attached to Echo Ridge. Money meant for injured handlers, retired K9S, kennel repairs, medical support, and families who had lost men in the program. Daniel had been assigned to review the field reports before the program closed. That was when he noticed the gaps. A dog listed as transferred after it had already died. A handler denied benefits because his assignment code had vanished. A widow told her husband's K9 stipend had never existed. Pages missing from county copies. Signatures that looked right until you compared them to originals. Gerald Voss handled logistics. Sam said, Clayton's father. Contracts. Payments. Transfers. He knew where every file moved and who would notice if one disappeared. And my father noticed. Sam's eyes shifted toward the photograph. Your father noticed everything. The words hit Ethan harder than comfort would have. He reached into his jacket and touched the dog tag beneath his shirt. feeling the familiar edge of Daniel's name against his fingers. Sam pulled another folder from beneath the reception counter. The tape holding it there had yellowed with age, but it still tore loose with a dry crack. Inside was a copy of the property transfer posted by the county the month before. According to the document, Samuel Briggs had willingly sold Echo Ridge K9 Rescue to Voss Development Group for $1 and consideration of outstanding debts. Ethan read the date. April 14th. Sam watched his face. That was the day they had me under anesthesia at the VA hospital. Left hip replacement. I woke up with stitches and a social worker telling me I'd missed a court deadline. Ethan turned to the witness line. Deputy Carl Henson. Sam gave a short, bitter breath. Carl was already dead by then. Heart gave out in February. Ethan laid the forged transfer beside the notebook. The pattern was no longer hidden. A man under anesthesia had signed away land. A dead deputy had witnessed it. A county stamp had made it official. And everyone had called Sam crazy because the lie came on paper. Then Ranger rose. His movement was quiet. But both men turned. The Malinois walked to the back wall, where a faded photograph of Atlas hung above the leash hooks. He pressed his nose to the lower corner of the frame, inhaled, and gave one low, controlled growl. Sam's hand tightened around the collar. Ethan lifted the photograph from the wall. Behind it, the wooden panel had deep scratches along one edge. Old claw marks hidden beneath dust. Sam's voice dropped. Atlas used to hide things there. Ethan looked at him. What things? Sam stared at the wall as if the answer might wound him all over again. Daniel's last recording. They did not sleep after that. Ethan photographed every page, copied every date, and called the VA records line twice before leaving a message with an old federal contact who had once served under a man who respected Daniel Cole. Sam sat in the broken office chair with Atlas's collar across his knees while Ranger guarded the door. Outside, headlights passed the fence twice but did not stop. By sunrise, the men who wanted Echo Ridge erased would come back with machines, lawyers, and badges. But this time, Sam Briggs would not be standing alone. And before that fight begins, tell me in the comments whether you think Daniel Cole's final recording will expose Voss completely. Share this story with someone who believes old soldiers and loyal dogs should never be forgotten. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the truth finally speaks. By sunrise, Echo Ridge looked like a place waiting for its last sentence. The sleet had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving a thin crust of ice over the gravel yard. The kennels stood in gray light, empty and silent, their doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Beyond the rear gate, 2 yellow demolition machines sat chained to flatbed trailers. Engines idling, exhaust rolling into the cold morning like smoke from a battlefield that had not yet started burning. Ethan stood in the shelter office doorway with his father's note folded inside his jacket. He had not slept. Neither had Sam. The old handler sat behind him in the broken office chair, Atlas's collar resting across his knees. His hands curled around it as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored. Ranger lay near the threshold, but his eyes were open, fixed on the yard. A black SUV pulled in behind the county truck. The driver stepped out first and opened the rear door. Clayton Voss emerged wearing a charcoal overcoat, black leather gloves, and shoes too clean for the mud beneath him. He did not look angry. That made him worse. Angry men made mistakes. Clayton moved with the calm confidence of someone who had spent his life letting paperwork do the dirty work. A lawyer followed him with a document case. Then the sheriff stepped out of the county truck. Avoiding Sam's eyes, Miller stood near the security vehicle. arms crossed, his jaw tight from the night before. Clayton looked at Ethan and smiled like they were meeting at a fundraiser. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I'm sorry this situation pulled you in." Ethan said nothing. Clayton glanced past him into the office. "Samuel, you shouldn't be here. We offered you transport. We offered placement. You keep refusing help." Sam's voice came from behind Ethan, low and worn. "You offered to lock me 3 counties away before you bulldozed the proof." Clayton gave a patient sigh. The kind men use when they want a room to believe they are the reasonable ones. "This is what I mean. Mr. Briggs has built a story around grief, old dogs, and documents he doesn't understand." The lawyer opened his case. "The property transfer is valid. Voss Development Group has legal possession. County order allows demolition this morning." Ethan stepped down from the doorway. Ranger rose with him. "That transfer says Sam Briggs signed over Echo Ridge on April 14th. Ethan said, "That's correct." The lawyer replied. Ethan pulled a folded copy from his jacket and held it up. He was under anesthesia at the VA hospital that day. The lawyer's face barely changed. Clayton's did. Only for a second. But Ethan saw his eyes move to Miller. Then back. Ethan continued. "The witness on the deed is Deputy Carl Henson. He died 2 months before the signing date." The sheriff shifted his weight. "Cole, these are matters for court." "They were matters for court," Ethan said, "until a dead man became a witness." A few of the demolition workers looked at one another. One cut the engine on his machine. The sudden quiet made the yard feel smaller. Clayton adjusted his gloves, though they were already straight. "You're making serious accusations based on scraps found in a condemned building." "Not scraps." Ethan turned and lifted the burned Echo Ridge log from the counter. "Service records, transfer forms, handler assignments, my father's signature, Gerald Voss's logistics approval." Clayton's polite expression tightened around his eyes. "My father's name has nothing to do with this," he said. Sam stood then. It cost him effort. His bad hip pulled him slightly to one side. But his back stayed straight. "Your father erased men," Sam said. "You erased the place where we could prove it." Clayton looked at him the way men look at stains they have already paid someone else to remove. "You need care, Samuel, not another audience." The lawyer stepped toward the office. "Any materials removed from the walls or floor of this property must be surrendered immediately." Ranger moved before Ethan spoke. He stepped into the lawyer's path. Not lunging, not barking, just placing his body between the man and the counter. His head lowered. His eyes held steady. The lawyer stopped so abruptly, his briefcase knocked against his knee. Ethan rested one hand lightly on Ranger's back. Nobody touches evidence before it's logged. Clayton's smile disappeared. "Evidence," he said. "You are a retired Marine trespassing in a private facility with an unstable homeless man and a dog. Don't confuse yourself with law enforcement." Ethan took out his phone. "I already called people outside this county." That was when Clayton's attention shifted to the back wall. It was small, but it was enough. His eyes flicked toward the empty leash hooks, toward the place where Atlas's old photograph had hung the night before. Ranger saw it too. The Malinois turned away from the lawyer and crossed the office. He pressed his nose against the lower paneling beneath the scratched wood. Inhaled once, then struck the wall with one paw. Sam whispered. "Atlas marked that spot before he died." Clayton snapped. "Stop this." Ethan picked up the pry bar he had taken from the emergency cabinet. "You're welcome to wait outside." He worked the metal under the panel. The old wood groaned, then cracked loose. Dust fell across the floor. Behind the wall, wrapped in oilcloth and packed inside a waterproof ammunition box, was a package small enough to hide and important enough to kill for. Clayton moved fast. He lunged for it. Ranger hit the space in front of him like a locked gate. A deep growl rolled through the office. Clayton froze with his gloved hand halfway extended. And for the first time that morning, he looked less like a businessman and more like a man who had heard footsteps behind a door he thought was sealed. Ethan opened the box. Inside were copied service files, a flash drive, a sealed letter, and a mini recorder with a strip of tape across the back. D. Cole final statement. Sam gripped the desk. Miller backed away near the door. The sheriff looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Clayton's voice dropped. "Turn that over to my attorney." Ethan pressed play. Static filled the office. Then his father's voice came through. Tired, urgent, and alive. "If this reaches Sam Briggs," Daniel Cole said, "it means Voss got to me first." No one moved. Ranger stood between Clayton and the recorder. Silent now, as if even the dog understood that the dead were finally speaking. Ethan did not stop the recording. The tiny speaker crackled on the reception counter, filling the condemned shelter office with the voice of a man everyone there had believed was safely buried in the past. "Gerald Voss has altered service records tied to Echo Ridge," Daniel Cole said through the static. "Handler names were removed from benefit eligibility files. K-9 transfer logs were rewritten. Funds assigned for medical care, kennel support, and family assistance were diverted through private vendors connected to Voss Logistics." Clayton Voss stood near the doorway, one gloved hand still half raised. Ranger planted between him and the counter like a living line he could not cross. The lawyer beside him had gone pale in the careful way men do when they realize the document in their briefcase may become evidence against them. The sheriff looked down at the floor. Sam Briggs did not move. He stood with Atlas's collar pressed against his chest. His fingers wrapped around the old leather so tightly the brass nameplate dug into his palm. For years, people had asked him for proof with faces that already said they would not believe him. Now the proof was speaking in a dead Marine's voice. The recording hissed, then continued. "Samuel Briggs is telling the truth. If his name disappears, it was removed by someone with access. If Echo Ridge is taken, it is not a sale. It is retaliation. Sam has the original transfer logs. Trust the dogs before the files." Ethan's throat tightened, but he kept his face still. He had spent most of his adult life angry at silence. Silence from the military. Silence from the county. Silence from the father who had never come home. But Daniel Cole had not left silence behind. He had left a trail. He had trusted a handler, a wounded K-9, and the hope that one day his son might know where to look. Clayton found his voice first. "This is absurd," he said. But the word came out thin. "A damaged recorder hidden in a wall has no legal standing. No chain of custody. No authentication. This proves nothing." Ethan looked at the lawyer. "Is that your official position?" The lawyer did not answer. Ethan reached into the ammunition box and laid the copied service records across the counter. One after another. Samuel Briggs, handler trainer. Atlas, military working dog. Echo Ridge K-9 Rehabilitation and Transfer Program. Field Evaluation Officer. Captain Daniel Cole. Logistics approval. Gerald Voss. Then he placed the forged property transfer beside them. "We don't need the recording to start with," Ethan said. "This deed says Sam signed away Echo Ridge on April 14th. His VA records show he was under anesthesia that morning. The witness, Deputy Carl Hinson, died 2 months before the signing date. The county stamp wasn't in use until the following year. And Sam's signature here doesn't match any verified signature from his service records. He tapped the dead witness line. This signature belongs to a dead man. A murmur moved through the yard outside. The demolition crew had stopped working. A few townspeople had gathered at the fence, drawn by the machines, the police vehicle, and the sight of Clayton Voss no longer smiling. The sheriff took a step forward. "Cole, hand over the documents." Ranger shifted once. Quiet but unmistakable. Ethan looked at the sheriff's hand until it lowered. "These go outside this county." Ethan said, "I made the calls before sunrise." Clayton's eyes sharpened. Ethan held his stare. "Va, Inspector General, Federal Property Crimes, and an old NCIS contact who owed my father more than a returned call." That was when Martha Keene, the retired county clerk, pushed through the small crowd at the fence. "He's right," she said. The sheriff turned. "Martha, don't." She flinched, then lifted her chin. "No, I should have said it years ago." Briggs wasn't the only one. There were other files, other handlers. A widow from Powell County, a man named Ruiz. Their folders came in complete. Then came back missing pages after Voss's people requested review. Sam looked at her. "Ruiz," he whispered. Martha's eyes filled. "I'm sorry." "Sam." Clayton spun toward his lawyer. "Say something." The lawyer slowly closed his document case. "I think you need separate counsel." That was the moment the ground shifted. Clayton Voss had arrived with machines, police, paperwork, and the calm certainty that an old homeless man would be erased before lunch. Now even his own lawyer was stepping away from him. The demolition foreman raised both hands. "We're not touching this place." Clayton turned on him. "You're under contract. Not for forged property." By noon, the demolition order was suspended. By late afternoon, federal investigators had taken custody of the records, the flash drive, the recorder, and the forged deed. The sheriff was ordered to surrender every county file connected to Echo Ridge. Miller gave a statement after learning Clayton would not protect him. Martha turned over the copies she had hidden for years. Clayton Voss left before sunset in the back of a federal vehicle, no longer speaking about process. But Sam did not ask whether Clayton would go to prison. He asked only one thing. "Will they put Atlas back in the record?" Ethan looked at the old collar in Sam's hands, then at Ranger standing beside him. "They'll put both of you back." 3 weeks later, a plain envelope arrived at Echo Ridge. Sam opened it at the repaired reception desk while morning sunlight fell across the cleaned photographs on the wall. Ranger slept near his boots. Ethan stood by the window, watching volunteers repaint the fence. Inside the envelope was a corrected service entry. Samuel Briggs, handler trainer. Atlas military working dog. Status verified. Sam read it twice. Then he removed his glasses and covered his face with one trembling hand. "They put him back," he whispered. Ethan placed his father's dog tag beside Atlas's collar on the desk. "And they put my father's truth back with him." By spring, the old sign came down. A new one went up, blue and white like the first one had been years ago. Echo Ridge K. 9. Rescue reopened. Sam no longer slept behind Kennel 7. He had a small room beside the office. A real bed. A coffee maker that worked when it wanted to. And a hook on the wall for Atlas's collar. Ethan never sold his father's house. He stayed in town and repaired what he could. Starting with the kennels. Then the fence. Then the parts of himself he thought the past had ruined. On the first warm evening, Sam sat on the front step while Ranger rested beside him. Gray muzzle on the old handler's boot. Sam placed one hand on the dog's head. "Good dog," he said. Ranger closed his eyes. He was not guarding a homeless man anymore. He was guarding a name returned to honor, a shelter brought back to life, and a promise that survived because one old handler, one retired Marine, and two loyal dogs refused to let the truth stay buried. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If Sam, Ethan, Atlas, and Ranger reminded you that loyalty can outlive even the darkest lie, leave a comment below. Share this story with someone who believes forgotten veterans deserve to be heard. And subscribe to support the channel and join us for the next story. Yenset like it Abner da Sua chain.